Asylum seekers trying to gain entry into the U.S. are getting their cases heard in tents. The Trump administration began hearings Monday in makeshift tent courthouses in South Texas. These hearings are for asylum seekers who were ordered to stay in Mexico as they wait for their immigration applications to be considered. CBS News reporter Camilo Montoya-Galvez joins me now on set. Camilo, thank you so much for being with us. I know you've been following this very closely. What more do we know about how these tent courts have been operating?
Right, so as you know, Elaine, the administration is really betting on this Remain in Mexico program to deter would-be migrants from Central America and other parts of the world, but they ran into a problem as they were expanding this policy. There weren't enough immigration courts close to the border to hear the cases for these migrants, so they built their own in tent facilities. They call them subside facilities for migrants to explain their asylum cases and for a judge to hear their cases. So essentially how it works is that big groups of migrants show up at ports of entries. They're escorted by U.S. officials to these tent facilities, and a judge in another location presides over their cases via teleconference. So the judge is not physically there. And of course, advocates just believe this is just another barrier to represent these migrants.
Are there lawyers there for these migrants?
You know, researchers at Syracuse University have done a couple of studies analyzing the tens of thousands of migrants who have been returned under this program, and they say about 1% of them have access to counsel and American lawyers. It's very difficult for them. I actually was just speaking to a family I met in the El Paso sector earlier in the summer, and they still have not been able to find a lawyer in Mexico. They have court on Thursday, and they're going to show up without a lawyer.
So what have conditions been like for these migrants waiting in Mexico?
Right, so again, these migrants are waiting in fairly dangerous cities in northern Mexico with high levels of insecurity and crime. Many of them struggle to find lawyers, shelter, employment, right? The Mexican government has made some vague promises to help them, but you know, it's very difficult to help tens of thousands of migrants who really want to be in the U.S. They don't want to be stranded in Mexico. So, and some of them, some lawyers and some advocacy groups have even documented cases where some of these migrants are kidnapped and extorted because criminal gangs know that these migrants have families in the U.S. that will pay money for ransom.
And what else are immigration advocates themselves saying about these tent courts?
Right, so there's really two controversies around these courts. One is that the administration is using money from FEMA's disaster relief funds to build these facilities, and that these facilities are not open to the public or people like me, journalists, right? I could go to the court in El Paso, which I've had, and observe court hearings, but I can't go right now to these tent facilities.
You would not be allowed as a journalist to observe the immigration proceedings. I
actually asked DHS today for permission to go into these facilities, but they don't have any application process in place for me to get a security clearance to go in there yet.
Because normally you would have just been able to walk into a building, a typical sort of immigration court
like a regular court in the criminal justice system.
And that's not allowed here because?
Well, because these areas, they say, are run by DHS and not the Justice Department branch, which runs the nation's immigration courts.
Interesting. All right, so I want to turn to another topic about last week's Supreme Court ruling to allow the Trump administration to ban most Central American migrants from seeking asylum in the U.S. What are immigration advocates telling you about that decision?
Right, so, you know, I talked to an attorney from the ACLU this morning. This is one of the groups that's mounting one of the two big challenges to this controversial rule. And they, you know, they said that they hope they will prevail, their argument will prevail in court eventually, but they conceded that this is a pretty devastating blow because the next oral arguments that the Ninth Circuit is going to hear are in December. So the administration can hypothetically continue to implement this for months until another judge or another panel can block this, and they fear that tens of thousands of migrants are going to be returned to places where they may face persecution because, as you know, the administration wants them to apply for asylum or another form of protection in the first country they travel through to get to the U.S., but some of these countries like Guatemala, Honduras, or even parts of Mexico are not safe enough and cannot guarantee these people protection.
So many developments with such far-reaching implications. Camilo Montoya-Galvez, thank you so much for stopping by to fill us in.
Thank you, Elaine.